Okay, thanks everyone for coming, and thank you to our panelists for taking the time to talk with us. For those who don't know, I'll just give some background. So, Economists for Inclusive Prosperity was started sort of in the 2018, 2019, and the idea was to provide a forum for economists to present and talk about sort of more policy relevant implications of their work, the kinds of things that don't make it into, peer-reviewed technical journals. And partly there was definitely an agenda in that we wanted to counter the view that economics was just kind of, basically lightly cloaked neoliberalism, and to sort of have showcase a larger diversity of like policy and normative views than you sort of people normally think about in economics. And we're slowly ramping up our programming after a lull, but you can see our previous policy briefs and videos and panels that we've done on our website. So with that intro, I just want to give some quick background on why do this panel. And we thought, given the importance of Palestine in the current policy discussion and its importance in the U.S. and around the world for everyone, we thought it was a useful thing for us to do is to hear and showcase kind of some of the discussions and issues that are happening from people, economists on the ground in Palestine, and just hear about what they think about and what they work on, and to sort of just create a pipeline for everyone else to sort of know what's going on and how they can help. This is part one of a two-part series, and we're going to have a second panel on in early September, on September 11th in the morning, and that will be kind of a much more global set of people sort of around the world that are working on issues related to Palestine. And so, with that background, I want to thank first Raja Khalidi for very much like organizing this and giving me names and very much helping put this together. And so I will let him take it away and organize and introduce the speakers. So without any ado, Raja, over to you.
Samira Awad is a assistant professor, possibly associate, excuse me, Samira, if I got it wrong, at Birzeit
No
University
worries.
and is working in particular on public health issues. Bilal Falah is a associate professor at the Hebron Polytechnic University and has worked extensively on a range of labor and other labor force and other labor market and other issues. And Rabih Murad is also an associate professor at Al-Najah University in Nablus, and also has assumed a wide portfolio of research tasks. All three of them, I'm proud to say, I had a chance to work with when I was Director General of the Palestine Economic Policy Research Institute. And in fact, segueing from that, when Suresh contacted me, and we talked about what sort of presentations by who. Indeed, the question of indigeneity, if you wish, came up in the sense that I thought it was very important for a first such seminar for you to hear from people like these three in the ground, on the ground, etc., and very much engaged in the sort of issues and that we're all concerned with, but in the way and using methodologies that, as Suresh sort of we in our discussion raised, data-driven economists. So I mean, what I want to say is that the Palestinian economy is by definition a political economy. I mean, talking about the Palestinian economy by definition, by nature, requires an understanding and a conceptualization in the context of political economy. That being said, I probably wouldn't know what a differential equation anymore looks like. However, our three colleagues are masters in these things, as much as all of you colleagues that are out there. And I think what the important thing is that they also not necessarily come from a political economy background, but everything they do by definition is framed by that political economy. So you'll hear about very well, as you advertise the seminar, occupation and violence, but in the numbers that explain its impacts and outcomes. Now, I'd just like to add a few minutes about something I'm working on now, which is a book which a bunch of younger, mainly economists and sociologists than I, will be hopefully working on in the next year, which is, provisionally titled The Long March of Development Thought in Palestine over a Century of Nation Building. And when I first began to explore this idea of Palestinian economic thought, maybe a decade ago, a late Palestinian economist colleague challenged my assumption and bluntly argued there's no such thing. That gave me pause to consider, coming from somebody who had been trained as a Marxist in Marxist economics, had been a communist militant, but then became a minister in the Palestinian Authority. Surely, I assumed he would appreciate the concept. But heeding his caution, in a first research I did on the subject, a first foray that some of you might be aware of in Jacobin, I focused on the timeline of a more limited thread of Palestinian economic doctrine. This tackled the idea more in terms of the socioeconomic policies advocated by Arab and Palestinian national liberation movement, not as a distinct body of coherent thought that developed and changed over time. Now, in the past decade, the work we've all done, empirical and analytical research on the Palestinian economy, allows for a deeper understanding of what we might mean by economic development thought in Palestine. These sort of the research, that my colleagues have done and I, a wide landscape, micro and macroeconomic and social conditions under adverse occupation and deprived sovereignty, prospects for sustained human development, Palestinian Authority and private sector policies to build a national economy, relations between the Palestinian economies inside Israel, East Jerusalem, and West Bank, the insidious socioeconomic impacts of settler colonialism, and more recently, the political economy implications of the genocidal Israeli war in Gaza. In that research journey, it became clear that behind every new economic policy enacted by the Palestinian government and debated publicly or politically reflected a development doctrine or theory or policy preference that was regularly being challenged by academic, civil society, or corporate advocates of a different policy or law rooted in alternative socioeconomic policy frameworks or imperatives. So, if nothing else, there appears to be going on under the surface, at least, in terms of a competition of ideas more than my erstwhile late comrade might have believed actually existed. Where there is smoke, there is fire. So it is not usual to describe a body of economic thought by its national features. Economics may be neoclassical, quantitative, heterodox, Marxist, but there's no Palestinian school of economic thought or practice. Yet what makes the case for there actually being a tradition of Palestinian economic development thought, however uneven or contradictory its path may have been, we will argue in this work, is the persistent systematic tension between a real discernible process of national economic development, Palestinian national economic development, that goes back into the Mandate period in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s, which was aborted and then systematically undermined on the one hand, and the Palestinians' nation's ever expanding conflict with Israeli settler colonialism, which today is at an apogee. So I won't say any more. I think we need to hear from Samira and Bilal and Rabah how this plays out. And I think that they are very good examples of this tradition being revived, but adapted to the circumstances as well as to the best sort of scientific methods. Samira, without further ado, because we know you have more important things to do than this, so please go ahead.
So I don't have the access to share actually. The host disabled attendee screen sharing, but I'm not attendee. So I've been granted access as panelist. So could you please
حاول تنزل
give
بدنا
me
نشوف وجهك
access?
شوي go ahead.
I don't have access to share. I can't.
You should have access
Okay,
to
yeah,
share now.
yeah. Now I have. Yeah, thank you. So, do you see my screen now?
Yes, we are able to see
Okay.
your slides.
Okay. So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel. So, today I'm going to present work which is joint with the World Health Organization, the WHO, the Palestinian Ministry of Health and the Palestinian Central Bureau of Statistics. The work is regarding the incidence of financial hardship in Palestine due to out-of-pocket health spending, which is different from catastrophic health expenditure. We'll see this in the next slide. We will measure the incidence during the time period where data is available between 2004 and 2023. So as we know, universal health coverage is one of the key targets of the Sustainable Development Goals, mainly target number 3.8. The goal of universal health coverage is to ensure that everyone have access to healthcare services upon need without being pushed into any financial hardship as a result of paying for health. That is, people shouldn't have to choose between seeking healthcare and meeting their basic needs. Universal health coverage is tracked by two indicators. So this is done by the United Nations and the World Bank and the World Health Organization. So the first indicator is about service coverage, which is beyond the scope of this study. The second indicator is about the financial hardship. Mainly we measure the indicator, and we do in this paper, we measure the share or incidence of households who face financial hardship as a result of paying for health expenditure from own pocket, and we will explain what do we mean by financial hardship. In Palestine, so empirical evidence, studies and statistics from the Palestinian Bureau of Statistics, also some, I think, reports from MAS, show that the large of Palestinian, the share of Palestinian households facing catastrophic health expenditure varies from 2 to about 7%, depending on the threshold we use. So the traditional measure of the Sustainable Development Goal 3.8.2 indicator is the catastrophic health expenditure, where we used to compare the value of or total household expenditure on health with their budget, whether measured by income or consumption expenditure. So if the value of out-of-pocket expenditure exceeds a certain threshold, 5, 10, 25, or 40%, we consider the household as facing catastrophic health expenditure. So based on this traditional estimate, results show that about 2 to 7% of Palestinian households face catastrophic health expenditure, and based on the same measure, about 2 to 5% of households are impoverished or pushed into poverty as a result of paying to out-of-pocket health expenditure. So what's the problem of this measure, traditional measure? Actually, there is a significant share of poor households, not in Palestine, and mainly in developing countries, in low-income and lower middle-income countries. There is a significant share of households who already, the share of their basic needs is greater than the international poverty line, or even the median income, or the national poverty line in the country. Also, if we calculate the disaggregate figures of catastrophic health expenditure or impoverished health expenditure based on, for example, income quintiles, some evidence show that actually richer people faces catastrophic health expenditure more than poor people. So there was a need to change this measure, and this we use in this study the updated measure, which is where we compare the value of out-of-pocket expenditure with an updated measure of a household budget, which will be explained in the next few slides. So the goal of this paper actually is the paper is still in progress, and this is one of the main objectives of the paper. We have other objectives, but actually I didn't have time to continue working on the paper and present other results. So the main goal, which I will present today, is to assess the incidence of financial hardship due to out-of-pocket health expenditure in Palestine over the time period 2004 to 2023, and to show how financial hardship varies across different groups, mainly socioeconomic and demographic groups. So how we measure financial hardship? So the traditional measure of catastrophic health expenditure, we compare out-of-pocket household out-of-pocket expenditure with a total household's income or consumption expenditure. Here we compare the value of out-of-pocket household health expenditure with what we call household's discretionary budget. If the value of the out-of-pocket health expenditure is greater than 40% of households' discretionary budget, then the household faces or experiences financial hardship due to out-of-pocket health spending. What is discretionary budget? Discretionary budget is household's total budget minus the cost of minimum basic needs, which is called societal poverty line, and the definition is developed by the World Bank. And the societal poverty line is either the international poverty line, which is specific for the country under consideration, or $1.15 plus 15% of the country's median income or consumption. By the way, in this study, I use consumption and budget interchangeably, but we use consumption expenditure actually, but we call it budget sometime, following the standard definition of the World Bank and other international organizations. The indicator is then divided to two components. The first component measures the proportion of households with positive out-of-pocket expenditure that exceeds the 40% of discretionary budget and is lower than the 100%. And the second component measures the proportion of the population with out-of-pocket expenditure that is greater than 100% of discretionary budget. And the first component measures the share of households with only large but not impoverishing out-of-pocket expenditure. The second component measure those face impoverishing out-of-pocket expenditure. So we use nationally representative the Palestinian Expenditure and Consumption Survey, the PICS, for specific years between the time period 2004 and 2023. The data covers both the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. However, for the last available survey in 2023, the data covers the survey covers data for Gaza only for the first 3 quarters, so there were no data for the last quarter because of the October war, actually. However, the weights have been adjusted in order to be able to use the data and compare it with the West Bank and with other surveys, previous surveys. So the survey includes data on 28 different health items, which are classified following the EFIP classification into outpatient healthcare services, or costs here, or expenditures, whatever, inpatient expenditure, medication or medicines or drugs, and medical products. Then the total out-of-pocket expenditure is the sum of these 4 categories at the household level. This table summarizes the main households characteristics across the different PICS surveys. So for example, just very quickly, regarding health insurance, in 2023, only 16.5% of Palestinian population was not insured. Based on different insurance categories, the bulk of the population has or is covered by the governmental health insurance, followed by the UNRWA coverage. It's not an insurance, actually, it's a coverage. And there is also about a third of the population which is covered by both government and UNRWA. The rest of the population has either private insurance or Israeli insurance. We also here describe some demographic characteristics of the Palestinian households, because we use these variables to disaggregate the values of financial or the incidence of financial hardship, because this classification is important as elder people and male-headed households or households with young or elderly people may spend more on health, so the incidence of financial hardship might be greater amongst these groups. So as for out-of-pocket health expenditure, this table summarizes the trends of out-of-pocket payments and the distribution across consumption quintiles. For example, so here we summarize results in nominal Israeli shekel. We can, at the national level, the average monthly out-of-pocket expenditure has increased like from 21 to about 48 shekel during the 20-year time span. And as for quintiles, of course, the value of out-of-pocket expenditure is greater for the richest quintiles. As a share of household consumption, also the share of out-of-pocket expenditure is greater, yeah, for the richest quintiles, and the share is, we can say, kind of stable over time for each quintile. As for health insurance, the coverage of health insurance is greater for the poorest quintiles. And as for a type of health expenditure, the largest share of out-of-pocket expenditure is for medication, which is about 2/3 actually of total out-of-pocket expenditure. And this actually reflects the low coverage of medications by the different health insurance schemes. So turning to the incidence of financial hardship, results show that about like 17.5% of the Palestinian population experienced financial hardship in 2024. The share has increased to 22.3 in 2023. The bulk of this share faces both large and impoverishing financial hardship, catastrophic health expenditures, the old measure. This aggregate result based on consumption quintiles show that, which is actually what we wanted to show, that the shares the greater for poorest quintiles. So the poorest quintile, so about actually 68% of the poorest quintile experienced financial hardship in 2023. And as for the richest quintile, only 3% of the population experienced financial hardship in 2023. Based on geographical distribution, so the share is large for those living in refugee camps and in Gaza Strip. So for example, in 2023, the share of the share of Palestinian households experiencing financial hardship was 33.8 in refugee camps, and about half of the population in Gaza Strip experienced financial hardship due to out-of-pocket health expenditure, as compared to only 5% in the West Bank. Also, we can see some discrepancies within West Bank, where the highest shares are observed in south of West Bank, which is south includes Hebron and Jericho. Regarding health insurance distribution, so those with health insurance faces higher incidence of financial hardship, and this is what unexpected actually, but we wanted to explain this result by disaggregating the value across the different insurance schemes, and results show that about 19% of those with public or government health insurance faces financial hardship, and the share is also large for those with UNRWA insurance. This reflects actually the ineffectiveness of the coverage of these health insurance schemes, where individuals may seek healthcare in other facilities, for example, private healthcare facilities. And regarding the demographic characteristics, our results show that households, for example, so I'm not gonna like present all the figures because of time constraint, but I will comment on, for example, households with individuals 60 years old or older than 60 years. So the share of the incidence of those experiencing financial hardship is large for this category. Okay. So to conclude, our goal, or one of our goals in this paper, was to assess the incidence of financial hardship in Palestine, financial hardship as a result of paying for healthcare from own pocket. Our results show that about 1/4 of the Palestinian population faces financial hardship due to OPEC expenditure in 2023, and that financial hardship, as expected, decreases across income quintiles. Also, the incidence of those experiencing financial hardship due to out-of-pocket expenditure is higher for those living in refugee camps and in Gaza Strip as compared to those living in rural and urban areas and in the West Bank, respectively. Also, lower incidence of financial hardship due to out-of-pocket expenditure was observed for those with private and Israeli health insurance. So to conclude, given the persistent, prolonged occupation, as well as the geographical separation between the two main Palestinian regions and the impact of COVID-19 together have affected the economic well-being of Palestinians, which also affected their access and payment to healthcare services. In addition to our results pertaining to health insurance, which reflects the lack of the effective coverage, particularly for the governmental health insurance and the UNRWA coverage. So our main recommendation is to revisit the benefit package and the cost coverage of the governmental health insurance in order to reduce reliance on out-of-pocket expenditure and hence the share of households facing financial hardship, which is important to progress towards achieving universal health coverage and other sustainable development goals. Thank you for your attention. And I think Raja and my colleagues will answer
Thank you so
any
much,
question.
Samira. Thank
Thank
you
you.
so
Thank
much. And
you.
it's a fascinating subject. And I'm sure you need now to go back and update it with the catastrophic numbers that must, on the same indicators now, both West Bank and Gaza. But we leave
Yes,
that to the
sure.
next year's seminar. Shukran, shukran.
Okay. Thank you.
يعطيك
Thank you very
العافية.
much. Thank you. Thank
Shukran.
you very much.
So, Dr. Bilal Falah, my dear friend and colleague, sitting in Hebron, each one of us, huh? One in Nablus, one in Ramallah, one
Yeah,
in. So that's the way we live, but we continue to work. Bilal, تفضل, the
thank
floor
you
is
very
yours, sir. بعطيك 16 دقيقة كمان.
much. No, 15, please. يعني promise is a promise. All right. Can you hear me, guys? Thank you very much. I'm really glad to join the webinar today. So let me just fix this a little bit. Okay, so what I'm presenting is a main finding of a paper that I published in 2024. The title of the paper, No Punitive House Demolition Doesn't Reduce Suicide Bombing, Revisiting Evidence from the Second Intifada. So back to the introduction of Raja, I'm gonna go directly through to the political economy in Palestine. So basically, let's just a second. I'm gonna, in the coming couple of slides, explain what punitive house demolition and then tell you why I was interested to write this paper. Okay, so just a second here. So punitive house demolition is kind of it's kind of policy that Israel has implemented ever since 1967, but mainly intensified during the Second Intifada, and it uses it. What is punitive house demolition is the Israeli government and the Israeli army demolished the house or the family house of Palestinians who fatally attack Israelis. And why they do it? Why they demolish houses in that fashion? Because they use it as deterrence. So in their mind, and it has this policy has been used, as I said, extensively in the Second Intifada to deter the suicide bombing events that was kind of a phenomenon during that period. And in their mind, an attacker or a suicide bomber is kind of a rational actor who calculated cost and benefits in the economics term. So if a heavy price is exacted in for a potential suicide bomber, if a heavy price is exacted in his family, then this will substantially raise the opportunity cost and deter this kind of act. Just to give some statistics before I get into this, it's during the second Intifada, about over 600 houses has been demolished as part of the this kind of punitive house demolition policy. Of course, there is a lot of debate about this kind of policy. Human rights organizations, international institutions, opponents to this policy in general say this kind of policy violates international law. Why? For the simple reason because it harms innocent individuals. The family members of the attackers they have committed no offense, and so it's harming them in that fashion and destroying their houses and accordingly ruin their lives is it's totally illegal, and there are lists of legal references that we can go back to, including Article 33 of Geneva Convention, as well as Article 53, and so on and so forth. There's a big debate that I explain in the paper. I don't, as I was explained to, I don't have much time to go through that. Anyways, here's that thing I wanted to tell you why I was interested to write this paper. By accident, some years ago, a couple of years before I published the paper, I came across this kind of article in Naidu. This is a mainstream article, and the kind of the title was is striking to me. It says, as you can see in the on the screen, Israel should raise terrorist homes to their very foundation, and he was referring to demolishing houses of the Palestinians who attack Israelis or suicide bombers. Why he says so? Because he acknowledges the debate that is going on even within the human rights institution inside Israel. But he says, okay, he acknowledges that, but he says that the Israeli government should go on and keep implementing this strategy. Why? Because it works. And he cited a paper that proves that it works, and the paper is by a couple of scholars from Hebrew University, led by Ben Melech, and was published in 2015. Just to give you a little bit about this paper, so what they find is that what they wanted to see is whether this policy did indeed reduce suicide bombing, and their findings show that it is indeed a vital deterrent, at least in the short run. What matters to me, and here's what drove me mainly to write a paper about this, is the Supreme Court has relied on an earlier version of this or earlier draft of this paper to reject a petition against resumption of punitive house demolition. It actually stopped in 2005, but resumed in 2014. So once I read this newspaper article and citing a scientific paper, and those who wrote the paper are political scientists, and I said to myself, okay, let's see to what extent these researchers have, abide by by scientific scrutiny of economics mainstream. So here's my research questions. I wanted to revisit their work and see if their finding accord with the scientific scrutiny. So I revisited their work, and the findings of the paper, just to cut through all the details, is to give you a hint of what I'm gonna show you at the end. I show that their findings about the deterrent effect of punitive house demolition is invalid. Why? Due to some, basic econometric reasons. They fail to sort out and control for confounding factors. And once I account for these factors, I found no effect of this house demolition policy. So again, why I was interested after I read the paper and I discovered that there might be something wrong, and I said to myself, listen, if I write a response paper to this research, which was published in Journal of Political Science, and I said to myself, maybe this will, change the opinion of the Israeli High Court. But anyway, I was totally wrong. I can talk about that later on in the question and answers session. Okay, so to let you know what I'm gonna present in the coming slides. So I'm gonna provide you very briefly an overview of the empirical model Ben Melech and his researcher has used in their modeling. And then I will talk about the possible unaccounted for confounding factors and how I modeled that. I show the findings and then explain, all right, I found no effective or statistically significant effect of this kind of punitive policy. Can we explain that? Because at the first glance, it might go against the basic e- economic logic of opportunity cost. And then I conclude. So what Ben Malick's papers did in their model, so they estimated a simple Poisson regression in which the dependent variable is the number of suicide bombers emanated from a given locality or district in a given month, right? So the main treatment variable is the punitive house demolition policy, as you can see, it's house demolition, which is the number of houses demolished in that locality at time t minus 1. They also account for a number of explanatory variables, socioeconomic characteristics of these localities, as well as certain security factors that might correlate between or co-vary between household demolition and suicide bombing. They also accounted for geography fixed effect, district fixed effect in our case, which accounts for unobserved district invariant characteristics. And here's the catch, right? That's what I thought when oops, just a second, I lost the graph. Here we go. Here is the catch. So they accounted for the year fixed effects, right? And I thought that could be, when I first read the paper, that I said that could be a killer. All right. Now, to show you some of their findings, so this is the main variable, punitive house demolition. So the sign is negative here, statistics and statistically significant across different model specification. So what this basically says that increases in house demolition can reduce future suicide bombing, right? Just to give you a more flavor of their findings, for example, some of the security control variables they used, they included targeted killing at T minus 1, other fatalities from targeted killings, curfew, they measured it at time T, unlike other explanatory variables. I thought that was weird, and I also found weird that the effect is positive because curfew is used to curb attacks, not to increase it. But I show that otherwise, how this effect evolves once I control for the confounding factors. They ran a number of robustness checks as the usual, and they claim that their findings is robust. Again, I don't want to spend time on talking about the robustness check they undertook. Right, here's the thing. I'm gonna now talk about what could be wrong with their model. The basic thing is that in their econometric modeling, they allowed house demolition and subsequent suicide bombing to vary per month and per district or locality. So in that sense, the effect of punitive house demolition, in order to, if we wish to sort out its causal effect or true coefficient of this variable, it should take into account, this is basic 101 econometrics, two types of confounding factors. First, they need, since the suicide bombing as well as punitive house demolition varies on monthly basis, they need to account for monthly varying shocks, the national shocks. So instead of accounting for year effect, they needed to account for month fixed effects. Why? Because I will show you in a minute that there are so many things happening within a year, and not correctly accounting for variation within a year might or will sway the findings of their model. So the first thing is they need to count for national shocks captured by month fixed effects. The other point is they need also to account, they need to make sure that they account for all important factors that vary per month and per district. Just to start, give you a flavor of the kind of confounding factors that changes at the national level and how that might affect their findings. I resorted to a paper by Jager and Pesserman published in 2008, and they were talking about the events of the Second Intifada and the most important events that took place during that period. And I can list a number of issues that or a number of examples or events that changed the intensity of the conflict or the intensity of the violence during the Second Intifada. Just to name few, the occurrence of September 11th in 2001, targeted killing of senior Palestinian militant, most famously Ra'id al-Karmi is a well-known leader militant in Fatah in Al-Aqsa Murder Brigades. Following his assassination, a wave of suicide bombing took place. Also, assassination of Ahmad Yassin in March 20 of 2004. Short-lived ceasefire in the end of June 2003, and the death of Yasser Arafat on November 11th of 2004. All these are month-to-month changes during the Second Intifada that could have or might have changed the intensity of the Intifada itself, and thus change the correlation or the how suicide bombing and punitive house demolition co-vary with each other. This is for the first effect that it need to be correctly accounted for. For the second effect, the locality or district time varying effect, there are lots of events that took place during the Second Intifada and needed to be correctly accounted for. I'm going to give you a famous example, which is the Operation Defense Shield, which took place in between March to May 2002. Here's what happened during that period. The Israeli army carried out an incursion of the Palestinian cities in the West Bank in different times, in different months. So the purpose of that incursion was to curb the intensity of the Second Intifada and mainly to curb or reduce or dismantle the suicide bombing attacks. So what they did during the incursion of the Palestinian cities, imposed during that period, imposed curfews, conducted house-to-house search, assassination, and I want to highlight here arrest of key militants and destroyed combat equipment, including bomb workshops. I'm gonna here highlight the effect of the arrest, and I'm gonna show you how it shapes the findings once I account for the arrest. This is to give you a flavor of how important of how aggressive the arrest was before and after the Operation Defense Shield. Before that operation, on average, Israel arrested around 180 Palestinians. Once they launched the operation, the average monthly arrest rose or shifted to about 485. Interestingly, the intensity of, as I said, the Operation Defense Field varied per district and month, right? And this is very important. I can show you in the data if I have time. I could have shown you that the number of arrests, I can show you a graph now. The number of arrests is higher in areas where there's a high frequency of punitive house demolition. So there's there's a covariation in between the arrest as a tactic and punitive house demolition as also another as a tactic too, with the same target of reducing the intensity of intifada and reduce suicide bombing. I can show
حاول
you all.
تلخص بلال.
Yeah, I will go fast now. Uh, just to show you graphically what happened. Here's the story of Ben Malich's paper. They show, well, here's what they show. In the solid line, they show the suicide bombing. In the dashed line, they show the punitive house demolition, the frequency. And what they show is once they started the house demolition and intensified, the suicide bombing reduced and maybe ended at the end of the period. Now, what I'm claiming is, what I'm want to show is, this is not there's hidden things within these two graphs. So if I take the number of arrests, for example, as a main variable or a main tactic for the Israelis, again, the solid line here is the just a second. The solid line is the suicide attacks, while the dashed line is the number of arrested Palestinians. There is a huge covariation, right? More arrest, less suicide attacks. Okay, just also here I'm also trying to draw a relationship between arrest and punitive house demolition. Again, there is a close correlation between these two variables. So what I'm trying to show here is just not accounting properly for other factors that gets in between house demolition and suicide bombing might just bias the findings. And here I do the test formally, where I play around with the model, the same models they use, the same data they use. But what I did in first column, for example, I introduced the month fixed effect instead of the year fixed effect. As you can see, the magnitude of the coefficient is reduced significantly and becomes statistically insignificant, meaning there's no effect of punitive house demolition. Or punitive house demolition at time t-1 cannot predict the frequency of suicide attacks in the following month. I also let's try to highlight the effect of arrest variable. For example, in this column here, column number, I cannot see from this Zoom toolbar. Anyways, in this column, in the sixth column, I kept the year fixed effect as is, and I introduced the arrest variable. Again, what the model showed, there's no effect. Once I control for the arrest as a main tactic, security tactic, the effect of punitive house demolition is no longer working. Right? Now
طيب
right,
يلا صار
yeah,
لك ثلث ساعة.
just a minute, right? So I ran another models. Again, I did run a robustness check that my findings are robust. Now, just a couple of slides I want to explain why, and here's what matters the most, I guess, for policies and for the discussion. So why I did not find why punitive house demolition was not deterring suicide bombers during the second Intifada. I did a lot of discussion in the paper, but bottom line, it's the willingness of the suicide bomber to exact revenge against excessive state oppression, which is Israel in this case, in an environment with asymmetric power. And I give you a few examples. Before any suicide bombing started, Israel killed a lot of Palestinians during demonstrations. Also, another evidence is I looked into earlier research that looked into the content of the will of the suicide bombers. There's a couple of research that did that and looked into over 100 will of the suicide bombers that they wrote before they committed their attacks. And there's across the board, there's one important reason they explained why they did it. It's the desire to end justice and seek revenge for close relatives and generally the killing of the Palestinian people. So after all, I was wondering, for those willing to pay the ultimate price for the reasons stated above, again, does house demolition really matter? In the context of the Palestinian Second Intifada, it didn't matter. It's the excessive oppression that the Israelis exacted against the Palestinian during the Second Intifada is, according to my model, is what drove suicide bombing, more or less. Thank you very much, and sorry for.
Thank you, Bilal. So my takeaway, if I was an Israeli Supreme Court judge, is don't waste money on house demolitions. Arrest them and target kill them. That's much more effective.
Could be,
But that's my non-data conclusion. So, Rabih Murrar, thank you very much for finding somewhere you could calmly take your place on the panel. تفضل, I won't introduce you, introduce your subject. Go ahead, please. رابح مش
Not like you are
سامعينك.
yeah.
You're on mute, maybe.
I'm
Now it's
glad to
good.
be with you. Thank you very much. My paper is inspired by a paper prepared by Raja Me in Mass 2-3 years ago, if you remember, Raja. So about sovereignty of PA, etc. So the main problem here is that the Palestinian economy face a sovereignty deficit. It's not a growth deficit, which is what I mean is a structural inability for the Palestinian economy to be autonomous and to make autonomous decision making. So this is relevant to the settler colonialism, which control and disrupt the institutions for sustainable growth in Palestine, which is unlike conventional development constraint. Palestinian economy challenge stem directly from systematic institutional dismantling, resource expropriation, and imposed external control, which was also confirmed by many international reports like UNCTAD, ISQA in the last few years, which also highlight the budget deficit trade imbalances without examining the root cause, which we will try to cover in this paper. So strong institutions are the foundations of development. Institutions, I mean here, the rules of the game that minimize uncertainty and also enable predictable economic behavior. So in Palestine, weak institutions produce economic inefficiency and misallocation of resources, corruption and rent seeking, political instability, and eroded public trust, in addition to inability to design or implement coherent policy, which also relevant to the colonial institutional legacies which persist for generation, which is similar to India's land tenure system and Bureau's meta labor system. I will explain both later, which were measurable under development stay for centuries after their imposition. So what about settler colonization, which replaced indigenous institutions in Palestine? So unlike traditional colonialism, resource extraction, settler colonialism seek to replace the indigenous population and its governance, which is reflected in three main pillars: land and resources. There is a systematic land disposition, settlement, expansion, and confiscation of natural resources, mainly in Area C in Palestine. But now, after 7th October, there is no Area A, B, and C. All the Palestinian areas are under Israeli disposition. Governance, the second pillar, dismantling of Palestinian decision-making authority and imposition of external control, which replace indigenous institutions with a structure that serve settlement, not the Palestinian interest. Third, the legitimacy and identity, which imposed institution foreign to Palestinian culture and history, generate a dysfunction and lack of legitimacy, which weaken the human resources in Palestine and negatively impact the economic growth. So just here some numbers because my presentation has no numbers like Bilal and Samira. So I will try to the occupation or the settler occupation in the last 25 years or the last 20 years between 2000 2020 based on UNCTAD 2022 report, a loss of $45 billion. The GDP projected to decline 16% in Palestine, which is, I think, was evident in the PCBS data in the last 2 years. Per capita income declined by 18%, and approximately 70% of Gaza fishing fleet was destroyed. The numbers is increased also in the last 2 years due to the bombing of all type of life in Gaza Strip. So what this means? This means that the Palestinian economy is structurally dependent on Israel. Israel control land, air, and sea, which constrain trade, employment, and create infrastructure dependent, which means that the PA unable to implement independence policy, which is against Oslo Accord, which was mainly to regulate the Palestinian-Israeli economic relation as an interim period. The institutionalized dependency, Israel control of Palestinian land, it instead create institutionalized dependency of the Palestinian economy on the Israeli economy, where Israel control all economic aspect in Palestine. In addition to the food access, restricting food access undermines development also in Palestine. You all watch what happened in Gaza Strip, the starvation in Gaza, systematic restriction on essential goods, including food and other type of agriculture and seeds, etc., which was essential for Gaza, and also now in the same in the West Bank, the inflation and prices due to constraint on import and export from between Palestine and Jordan, which is the only entrance of Palestinian economy to the world. So rethinking sovereignty is a dynamic process. Sovereignty is absolute and comprehensive jurisdiction over the people on the territory of the sovereign state. But in the Palestinian case, or the framework of this paper, is that sovereignty is a gradual, strategic, institutionally embedded process, advanced even under constrained autonomy. So what we mean here that Palestinian sovereignty building requires reducing dependency on the Israeli economy, strengthening local production, rebuilding autonomous governance institution, and restoring control over natural resources, even under occupation. So this reframing matter because shift focus away from waiting indefinitely for political independence toward building element of economic sovereignty now. So the problem in formal institution, where the formal institution was weakened in Palestine due to the occupation in the last 30 years, or even from 1967. So formal governance capacity constrained by occupation control, limited authority to design or enforce policy, legitimacy eroded by imposed external structure, requires deliberate long-term reconstruction, which make the informal institution in Palestine, which should be a kind of resilience, not sovereign over formal institution. There is a clan network and traditional law which fill governance gap, and community-based network preserve cultural identity and continuity with pre-occupation system. So informal institution cannot substitute for robust formal governance, but sustainable development requires strengthening formal institutions while also respecting and integrating informal mechanisms. So here we have three pillars for economic sovereignty, which requires delinking and local production first, reduce dependency on Israeli occupation, by developing and productive capacity in the agriculture, manufacturing and service sector, diversification of a trade relationship with the at local level with the Arab countries and the world, and financial institution. Second, the strengthening of institution requires rebuild autonomous governance capacity, establish transparent, accountable decision making, which also started in the last 2 years. Still, we have a long way to achieve autonomous governance capacity in Palestine because of the financial crisis and the Israeli constraint on the Palestinian national system, not only the government, but also the population, local life, and all aspects of Palestinian economy. Also, institution requires reduce corruption and political instability. Third, restore resources by reclaim control over land and water, develop Palestinian natural resources, agriculture capacity. It's important to rebuild the capacity of this important sector in Palestine. And we find a lot of initiative in the last 2 years, mainly after 7th October, for people who back to the land, but they need more resilience, more support at governance level, protect Palestinian maritime resources. So, Raja, it's I think the last slide. So, donor strategy in Palestine prioritize stability, perpetuate dependency. So here, typical, the donors' recommendation, mainly in Palestine, focus on governance budget deficit, like spending cut, revenue increase, while ignoring the structural constraint imposed by occupation. This is development policy that treats symptoms while ignoring the main cause of occupation. Conditional aid on Palestinian agency, and we all see that in the last 2 years they push against the Palestinian government to make reforming, and also either in the Palestinian curriculum and in at financial or spending level, but till now they didn't they didn't put any pressure on the Israeli government to release the Palestinian tariff or the Palestinian money, which amount 15 billion shekel, around $5 billion in the last years.
Okay, I'm going to hand back to Suresh, but I think the next thing we need is Rabah and Bilal to model this institutional relation between the formal and informal, and how one is, in fact, you're right, is collapsing before our eyes, and the other one somehow continues to keep the ship afloat. So that's next year's task, okay? We want a proper model, a poisson regression as well,
Yeah.
whatever that is.
Thank you, Raja. Thank you.
Suresh,
Yeah.
I hand back to you. Thank
Yeah,
you very
thanks.
much for all
We
of
only
this.
have a few minutes for questions, and I just kind of maybe there's one question I think from the audience about how does Israeli government health insurance works for Palestinians, but that might be best aimed at Samira, who's no longer here. So apologies to the questioner, because I think that
No, we can
panelist
answer
had,
that. One of us can
you can
answer
answer that. Go for it.
Well, very briefly, Palestinian workers in Israel, who used to be number 150 to 200,000, around a half of them until 23, around a half of them had permits. And if you have a permit, you get the basic benefits of health as well as social security insurance. So you make contributions, your employer puts them aside, the government is gives them to you if you stop. So, but now, of course. So her data was, of course, until 23, when that was an important source of health insurance. Plus, the people who live in East Jerusalem, I assume, are part of her calculations, and all of the East Jerusalem Palestinians, some 300,000, 350, also get Israeli health insurance.
Great. So I have kind of a just general like high level question. Partly, I'm involved in a textbook project on teaching economics that's called CORE. and it's partly just how does the economics community in Palestine like sort of relate to the PA, and what do your students wind up doing? Like, how is it used in the government and in policy making? Is the PA listening to you? Like, what's the relationship between the economics kind of
I'd
profession
like
and
both Bilal
yeah.
and because they've both worked in mass as policy making and they know very well and now even Rabih is a policy maker since he's become head of the TVET National Commission. So please Bilal ورابح جاوبوا هذا السؤال.
Listen, I think we don't have good news for that. We used to the formal institutions that would speak for the people's will is no longer existing, mainly the Legislative Council. So we are led by administrative orders from the chairman, from President Mahmoud Abbas. That's how things go here. Also, due to the current conditions and the mainly after the start of October 7th war, and you know, how to say that it's there's no lots of room for people to speak up due to oppression, mainly coming from the Israeli side. So it's they are closely watching the media, the social media administrative arrest, and the conditions of the arrest now. You probably saw some on the news. It's horrible to say the least. It's horrible to say the least. So don't imagine that we live in a conditions where we have functioning government and we have students and student councils and we can speak up and we choose not to speak up. Things don't work like this in Palestine. It's very delicate. It's very delicate to say
Yeah,
the
I mean,
least.
basically things have, I mean, the governance situation is, it's not collapsed so much as it's ossified, and it no longer really is able to respond in a way that if you have a legislative assembly, of course it used to, but even after that, the structures of consultation, etc., were there and they were listening. Now, policy is made by, like Bilal said, a political team with watching what the street is saying and with certain economic interests able to access them and influence their decisions, things like that. So it's not really, so there is a divorce between this very strong capacity we have of policy advisory research or policy research as evidenced today and the need, of course, for that to be listened to, at least read, and the fact that really the politics now, especially, I mean, it's not the way it was, to be honest. In the 90s, even until the Second Intifada, there was still an institutional sort of synergy between places like Mass and the government, ministries. So, Rabih, just add to that,
Yeah,
if you
I
like.
will talk maybe more a little bit positive than Bilal, but I will talk about my experience in the government since 4 months. I did a lot of policy
You're a politician
research in the
now, huh?
last, yeah, in the last 3, 4 years. I did many policy research in mass and so mainly on TVET, for example. I did a lot of consultation and policy report about TVET. When I came to try to implement that at government level in the institution where I am, I am the head of institution. I faced a lot of obstacles and many constraints, and this is due to the weak governance. Sometimes it's because of the hierarchy, sometimes because of the maybe indesirability of system to work. The system is dysfunction. Sometimes you sit with the private sector, try to do something, there's no trust. They tell you don't have money, we had debt for the government, so we need our debt. You don't have money to do your policy. It's a kind of also, to be honest, Israel destroy everything, and because the government is like have nothing to afford at because policy need money. money to be implemented. For example, I'm a head of institution. If I need to implement my policy, ignore all that, governance and all that issue. I have a good will to work and to implement these policies, but you don't have any tool for financial tool. You go to the government, we need financial incentive for a private sector to host, for example, apprenticeship or trainees. They don't. It's a kind also, to be honest, Israeli constraint, mainly in the last 3 years, destroy any kind of Palestinian will to do any kind of improving governance or implication of policy. So I try to do all my best. I ignore all that constraints, all that government hierarchy, dysfunction, etc. But policy need resources, and we don't have the resources.
Let me, should
Thanks.
I answer that question? Yeah, there's a question in the Q&A.
Yeah, I just think it's a great question to end on. But which is just like, what can Western-based researchers do to help? And I think, like, how can we support your work, and what kinds of things do you need? And that I think would be a great, like, last question to hear from you all.
Again, as university professors, they can add to what I think. But my point is that you have today introduced yourselves to 3 universities through these people, and I think you got we need more inter-university work projects, joint projects, and it's not for the money, but it's also, in fact, to provide the opportunity for people like Bilal, Rabih, and Samira, who otherwise have huge, terribly heavy teaching loads. There are no resources in these universities for research. So it's that sort of partnership with, individual or institutional partners in Western academia that I think is the obvious it's also the most feasible and most accessible way of moving forward. And you, Suresh, we rely on you to sort of interface for us, network for us, and we will do the same. Maybe when, Rabih and Bilal, you have projects that you need people from some of, we can use this network to keep some, so that it's not just a one-off seminar. But Bilal,
That
as
would
I
be
would
great.
like to leave any more,
Yeah,
one more
thank
minute from
you.
each of you.
Yes, I think inviting us to this platform is it's the kind of thing we would like the Western researchers and academia to keep doing. I think this is a
To be
good chance.
exposed to our work, yeah.
Was our work, because to be honest with you, most of the research in the mainstream economics or mainstream economic journals, most of the time it's one-sided. And for us, the Palestinians, and tell you, it's not about impression. I can tell you from experience.
Yeah,
We
sure.
we have hard time publishing at mainstream journals. I can speak of myself. For example, I sent this paper before published at this journal. Mainly, I framed it, I wrote it, I edited it just to be a response paper to be published for the Journal of Political Science, because what they published has really ruined the lives of hundreds of Palestinian families. And I thought, just being objective, they could give me a chance, or could give a chance for another voice, some other scientific voice to have some saying about that. But they refused because on the ground that this is kind of replication paper, although I am bringing a new theory, and I'm using a new additional variables to try to test a very important policy, because here's one
Yeah,
example of science is being used to decide on people's faith. At least we need to be, I'm not saying you have only to listen to Palestinians, but at least to give us a chance to talk, to be listened to. This is one thing. Also, we're facing difficulties in talking to or joining, at least in person, when it comes to workshops. For example, I was invited at LSE to present a similar project to this one, and it's about the same stuff but from different angle. And my visa was refused. The visa was refused for all Palestinians who applied from Palestine for bogus reasons. For bogus reasons, they were lying to us why they refused the visa. One reason is that they claim to communicate to have contacted the LSE It turned out they did not, because they said they contact the LSE and nobody
Okay, you can
responded.
invite me. I have an American passport. I can go
Right,
anywhere.
I wish I
خلاص
told you about that,
خلاص
but
بلال
I
راح طيب.
presented online.
Yeah.
What bottom line? What I want to say is just listen to Palestinians more closely. Listen to what they say of their own research. What matters a lot for us. Thank you very much.
Agency. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what it's all about. But we really appreciate that Suresh, the way you responded in preparing this, and we look forward to what you're going to organize next time.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. I'm amazed that just like all the work and what everyone's put together. It's like really high level stuff that you guys have done, and it's great. I want to thank everyone for coming, and thank Raja and Bilal and where he left.
Rabih left. Yeah, he was.
Yeah. Okay. But yes, and thanks everyone for showing up. This will be recorded and on our YouTube channel. Feel free to send it. We're having another one. I would like to do this again. Actually, this was just great. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much.
And thank you.
Bye bye.